Well, the holiday season is just around the corner. In a way, it can't come soon enough. But with ever-increasing COVID case numbers, experts keep warning us, keep the celebrations small. Even mall Santas are waving to children from bubbles this year. Sign of the times. And we know from the last major holiday just how much rides on what we do in the coming weeks. So if you have any questions about COVID, family, and the holidays, we've got infectious diseases specialist Dr. Lenora Saxinger and epidemiologist Rewat Deonandan joining us to guide us through this. And Dr. Saxinger, I mean, we've had this conversation before, right? Right before Thanksgiving, we now know the aftermath was that COVID cases continued upwards, but what is unclear to me is whether Thanksgiving played an important part in that or if cases were simply going up anyway. What do we know?
I think in a lot of places there had been a number of epidemiologic indicators that had started to increase even in late September, early October. But really the Thanksgiving effect seemed to potentially accelerate that. And even some of the medical officers of health mentioned that when they were contact tracing new cases in the weeks following Thanksgiving, that many of them had had family gatherings. And the other thing that we've seen is that around that time, we started to see spillover of cases from younger people, and their kind of 20 to 40 age range was the major age affected for a lot of the summer and early fall. And we started to see spillover into older people around that time and consequent increased hospitalizations and ICU stays. So I don't know if it's watertight, but it's extremely suggestive that Thanksgiving was an accelerant, basically.
So then, Rewat Deonandan, I mean, what would be the cost of carelessness this Christmas in the sense of, I mean, you know, what lessons did we learn from Thanksgiving that might inform how we think about this upcoming holiday season?
We learned that national holidays are really bad for controlling infectious disease epidemics, right? So what we learned as well is there's an opportunity here to redefine what that holiday is. Back in Thanksgiving and Halloween, we asked ourselves, what really is Halloween and Thanksgiving? Now, what is Christmas? What are the holidays? Is it an opportunity to go to the mall and do a lot of shopping? Is it Santa Claus parades? Is it endless office parties? Or is it quality time spent with a small number of close loved ones? Is that how we're going to spend the time? We also learned that it's possible to do these things remotely if you can, and many people can. So it's an opportunity to question what we want out of a holiday and what we're willing to sacrifice to keep society functioning.
Right, but you know, you guys don't need me to tell you it's not easy, right, to make that kind of choice. And Dr. Saxinger, I mean, here's a question that we received from Diane Peltier in Edmonton. My father is 89 and lives alone, about a 2-hour drive away. If we both self-isolate for 14 days prior, would I be able to visit him over Christmas for a few days without risk? What do you say?
You know, that's exactly the kind of heartbreaking situation that makes people really, you know, think that it's not worth it to do all the prevention. But, you know, there's an important point here. She mentions, you know, if I self-isolate for 14 days, can I do this with no risk? I would say we can never say no risk right now, but we could potentially say fairly minimal risk, and that risk might be acceptable to both her and her father to have that Christmas togetherness. And so we look at, you know, who are you going to be with? Where are you going to be? How can you manage the risks? And particularly if you are in a position to be able to quarantine yourself pretty strictly for 14 days prior to seeing others, that would really increase the safety of any gathering significantly. So it's always going to be a trade-off, but to me, that sounds like one worth discussing.
You know, speaking of mitigating risk and trade-offs, we heard BC's Premier call for a coherent nationwide approach to travel. Have a listen to what he said.
We need a pan-Canadian approach to travel. We need to make sure that people in Coquitlam are living under the same rules as people in Chicoutimi. We need to make sure that those who want to come to British Columbia must only do so if it is essential for their business or their well-being.
Rewat, what should people consider about traveling this holiday season, no matter how the federal government responds to that kind of a request?
Well, it's important to remember that the places in the world that have done a good job at containing COVID have restricted travel to some extent. At the very least, they've monitored their borders. When it comes to individual choices, especially around the holidays, don't travel. If you've got that choice, choose to stay put. If you must travel, avoid opportunities for exposure. For example, drive in your own car if you have that opportunity rather than taking the bus. I know some people haven't got that choice, but do so. If you have to fly, choose a shorter flight. Your chances of exposure increase dramatically if the flight is longer. And frankly, it's getting to the airport and and being in the airport and getting on and off the plane, that's the problem, not so much the flight.
Right.
So in other words, just don't travel if you don't have to, but if you have to, just minimize your exposures.
Dr. Saxinger, one last thought from you. I've got about 30 seconds left on minimizing the risk for those people who do weigh the risks and decide, you know what, I still want to get together with my loved ones. What's some helpful advice?
I would say the period of quarantine prior to gathering, paying attention to the space you're gathering in and the ventilatory, like if it's a closed space versus quite an open space, opening windows and managing the heating as best as possible, masking while you're not eating or drinking and still maintaining distance. Those things would all help. And also maybe considering, breaking the group up into smaller groups so that you're not spending as much time in shared airspace as a long group.
Ray Watt-Dionand and Lenora Saxinger, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.